John says to me, you've mentioned that Gammell would take his students to the theater and concert hall, and you yourself have encouraged your students to read broadly in literature and to experience the performing arts. Is exposure to the other fine arts useful to a painter? If so, why? Is there something especially important to the Boston School method in experiencing other fine arts? Another really good question, John. But before I go into it, actually, I think I better give some thanks here. 6 of you guys have come through this week. I think 4 of you are recurring, and now the other 2 have definitely given before. So thank you, everybody. Jimmy C., Christopher F., Adam C., Stephen J., Benjamin C., and David D. And that is something for which I'm really grateful. It seems like it comes just on the heels of Mr. Producer disappearing on us for 2 weeks. So, by the way, I don't mean to give it an apology, but that one 10-minute one, the drawing one, I didn't have any choice that night but to cut it short. So I'm just letting you know that was a thing. So let's go back to the question that John brings to us, and I'll deal with the points here, and then I'm going to go just look at some pictures that remind me of some of the points I wanted to make. It's one of the things I've been doing is putting in images that remind me of the subject matter that we're dealing with. So, and then it's also more fun for you, obviously, to listen to it. But mention the Gammells. Gammell did send his students to the opera. In the summertime in Williamstown, we went to the summer theater, and it was a theater that was basically strong professionals that were out of New York, and that was some of their summer activity. Frank Langella and some other names you might recognize. I'm thinking Blythe Danner. I'm thinking several people like that. Maybe we were able to see. Gammell sent us to the opera whenever that was in town. I'm trying to think if I saw Faust, or it may have been Faust, and whatever other ones. So it's very true that was a thing. Gammell, in his writing, if you've read him widely, you'll hear him talking about it. I kind of ended talking about it in the sense of the student's general education, the importance of a general education. But why is an interesting question. Why did he have you do it? It's understandable when you say, well, he's doing it, he wants you to read broadly in literature, because Gammell was himself an imaginative painter, and there's your subject matter. I'm going to look at that. But also the experience of the performing arts. What's involved in that? So is exposure to other fine arts useful to a painter? Clearly so. And then is there something important to the Boston School method in experiencing other fine arts? That last question, I would have to say I wouldn't argue that there is something special about in relation to the Boston School. An educated painter, that I say a widely educated painter, is going to have more to draw on. If you're widely educated in other art forms, there'll be parallels literally in the form, often really useful ones. There might even be, in the case of the image I'm showing you now, just popping this up, is from Martha Graham. Gammell was a huge fan of Martha Graham, as I recall. And but you can see any number of, if you look at Gammell's paintings, I'm not showing them side by side, but you can see that Gammell was actually using configurations like this, as like having 3 or 4 figures in a row, a little bit of an Art Deco sort of a look sometimes. But did he get it from Martha Graham? Sometimes he's got these exaggerated poses like this, obviously sometimes borrowing from the dance. Exaggerated poses, trying to fully express something that, about fear or pushing away or something, the facial expression here, Gammell does the same thing. He's borrowing from, you can see it in numbers of his pictures, this borrowing. That one, particularly right there, reminds me of one of the biblical themed ones. But Degas actually was borrowing color schemes from the dance, and I've recommended people up here in my area go down to Dartmouth College when they have dance in town at the college theater, and because of various things like that, color schemes on a stage, very much what Degas was drawing much from. And so there's who knows how many other things you can get, but that's the dance has an element, obviously, of the visual. You can find some of the same stuff in movies too, by the way. I do watch movies with the specific idea of finding ones that are visually pleasing, and it's just background for me. I'm not trying to borrow it straight into a picture or anything like that. Some of the stuff that you're seeing with Martha Graham does look like Gammell's borrowing a mentality. And by the way, it's Millet who said avoid the theater. So he's talking about in your paintings, avoid the theater. It intrigues me. Especially, I was laughing about it when I was reading Millet as a student of Gammell's. And reading widely per Gammell's own wisdom, in relation to teaching students. Obviously. So, but let's just look at some other pictures. Maybe some other thoughts will come up. The next group of them is just books that Gammell had in his shelves. And Gammell's first serious number of paintings are all Bible themes. And there's some amazing stories throughout the Bible. My kids always loved the stories in the Bible. But they are frequently very visually accessible, very easy to picture. I have I should have put that on screen. I had literally an overnight image of a version of the Last Judgment, separating the sheep from the goats, except it's humans, and it came into my mind full blown, an abstraction I designed from a passage in I believe it was the book of 2 Peter or something like that. But Murray's Manual of Mythology was there. This one right here actually is a classic myths in English literature and in art. So it's rich with subject matter. But if subject matter is nothing, it's just rich with subject matter anyway. And it may be that one of them excites you, and you want to operate from an imaginative storytelling, illustrative point of view. There you are as your resource. But the more you have to draw from, the more stories you've known. And it was true that Jerome recommended that students, if they are of that bent, that they constantly do drawings from those when they have the images, when they have the stories in front of them. And as he would call it, ideas for pictures, subject ideas. But the Divine Comedy, Gammell recommended. He read Psychological Types. He had suggested we read that. But Gammell was rather a serious student of Jung, albeit one that his friends, and I want to tell you, James, it was the psychologist, James, that may have been the guy, but who told him that he didn't know what he was talking about. In a self-deprecating way, Gammell was telling us that, and of course advising us against trying to pretend we're experts in fields we're not experts in, just because we're knowledgeable in one area. But any number of Gammell's, well, The Hound of Heaven is a book that, you can say it's based on that poem, but it's based on an interpretation, what you might call a Jungian interpretation. But you see that without that knowledge, there would have been this lack of wealth of ideas. And Gammell himself was talking about it like a nervous breakdown experience, which he himself said that he suffered from. And so how much of this came via some psychologist or whatever, don't know. But you can read for other reasons. And I can't recall that Gammell had books like this on his shelf that he was recommending, but the self-help shelf, I mean, for one thing, you need to learn to think. And Gammell was that guy saying, you need to think this through. Well, as I said, I had no clue what think through meant even. Maybe he learned that in school or from one of his teachers, one of his mentors when he was home educated. But the memory book by Lucas was my first introduction to memory reading. Gammell having brought us into the world of memory drawing, and there are all kinds of applications for things like that are useful. Applied imagination is just simply using your imagination to solve problems, to generate original ideas, new ideas, variations, and so on. It's largely about brainstorming, but it's really it's a book, by the way, with I'm going to say about 1,000 or some number, maybe 500 illustrations, and I don't think any of them are from the fine arts, which isn't that interesting? But poetic diction, study in meaning. That's that place where C.S. Lewis said he learned to begin to learn to think. Talent is Overrated is just one of those books where you begin to start talking about this idea of well, what is it then? He may be the guy, or certainly maybe his teacher, who was the guy who said that it's 10,000 hours of well-directed practice that is needed. So that kind of background knowledge really helps you. Or disciplines from other sports, like Jerry Lucas up there in that memory book thing. Jerry Lucas was a basketball star, New York Knicks, back in the day, as they say. You can read philosophy. The Nurtured by Love up there is actually Suzuki's own book, and it's an autobiography, full of parallels to what we're doing. It's music. This guy's a musician, though. He teaches music. But I remember finding on the shelves Gammell's Aristotle's Poetica and Longinus, if that's correctly pronounced, on the Sublime, and both, and as well as Friedrich Schiller's book on the aesthetic education of man. I've talked about Edmund Burke and other guys like that as being those kinds of benefits. So Gammell had all this stuff surrounding us, and the expectation was we would read widely. I mean, that doesn't get you out of going to museums as often as you can. And when you go to museums, look at sculpture, look at pottery, look at everything in the museum, look at furniture, rugs, anything, decorative arts, and look broadly at the arts. Don't just look at the arts. This is just the obvious, right? Look at if you're Western, look at Oriental art. If you're Oriental, look at Western art. But look at all the arts that you possibly can get your hands on. Let's just see if I can think of other things that I should talk about. We went to concerts. So much other stuff. We read poetry. I mean, this is under Gammell's suggestion. One thing I have found myself doing is watching and listening to stars in sports and remarkable parallels, but mostly about disciplines. Larry Bird said if he heard anybody was working harder than him, he wouldn't. If he heard about it, he would work harder. He wanted to be the hardest working guy. So that's very similar to the talent is overrated. I'm sorry, the idea of talent, and talent as the thing rather than the 10,000 hours of well-directed work, right? Those disciplines, that sort of thing. But these guys, for example, one of the guys I used in sports is Bobby Jones, the golfer. He says, if I think about 3 things, I make a bad shot. Think about 2 things, I make a better one. But if I think about 1 thing, I make a great shot. Really important in painting. And so how widely can you read? How widely can you get experience? Get to know people in other trades. I find that every single one of my students, some of them come from backgrounds in welding, some of them come from backgrounds in construction, some from music, and every one of them has Well, one is a tennis star. Every one of them has parallels that are just remarkably useful for bolstering up the very underlying concepts of a discipline or a craft. So anyway, but that's the story, John. That there's so much background you want to. And Gammell's idea was give yourself as broad an education as you can. Everything pointed, when we first heard from Gammell on that subject, everything pointed to subject matter. The idea of having plenty to draw from, things that inspired you, that made you want to make the. And Gammell would say it's like a lubricant, the subject, something to keep you in the room. So it had to be something inspiring. Well, if you read enough, Dante's Inferno, well, whatever. But if you read enough, I'm thinking of Robert Louis Stevenson, even so many other guys that like the N.C. Wyeth illustrations. But the parallel art forms are really, I find, big. Even the stage, the theater, the movies. I mean, there's just things that are just remarkably. Like, well, let's just take a movie for example, The Rectangle. Now it's just me talking. Gammell didn't recommend we go to see movies. Most of the guys around me did. I didn't have the dollars to do it back in the day. But The Rectangle, everything is designing a rectangle. And I remember any number. I think there's a movie called Shane, in which it feels like there's a number. My memory serves me, if it does, I should say. A number of those Western, it's a Western, and it just seems to me a whole number of those are based on maybe Remington or Russell's, American cowboy painters, paintings, and others. So, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that gets it into your head a little bit. Let's just look at your question again and see if I've mentioned that Gammell would take his students to the theater, concert hall, yep, and encourage students to read broadly literature and explain and experience the performing arts. Is it useful to a painter? So you've heard that. And is there something especially important to the Boston School method in experiencing other fine arts? I can't honestly say in one sense that there is. I mean, I think the Boston School method, the way we work, a little bit maybe in some sculpture areas. The way we work, that one I can't make anything out of that. The methods of the Boston School and how that. John, maybe come back to me. Maybe you actually have thought of something already that you consider a parallel. I mean, it wouldn't be any different than for all the other arts, to my mind anyway, that it's just really about creating unity. And the fundamental thing about all of the arts is this creation of a unity, in our case, the visual. But if you, instead of saying Boston School method, if you said the latest development of painting, and I'm talking about not like Whistler and Degas, because I happen to be thinking about them, thinking to do a lecture on them one of these days. But because what's happening with them is they're all of a sudden buying into all sorts of parallels like that, parallelisms, like you find in poetry and music and phrasing. And I mean, so many ways in which this has all of a sudden become more the point. But I wouldn't say that's particularly the Boston School as much as the evolution of painting at that point. Well, make of that what you will. That's probably the best I can do with it for now. So I think we'll leave it at that. It was a remarkable experience to me. Having gotten to Gammell, I had not been one of those people. I wasn't from a wealthy background. I had not experienced the theater. I hadn't experienced the dance hall, the ballet. A little bit on for example, on television or in a movie or something like that. But it was a remarkable experience, and I really could understand, having seen in a dance hall or auditorium the various dance companies and the kind of amazing things they would do visually. I could really understand Gammell's connection, but yeah, I hadn't seen it. It was a major major bit of information that helped you. Maybe this is the key thing. It really helps you to take your form seriously. Just thinking about just thinking about how many people actually were out there performing in all these different venues, all of which were under the word art form, right? So the more the better. Yeah, yeah. But and then again, as I said, just don't fail to get to the museums. Whenever you're in an area where there's a new museum, go to it, have a look, and look around. I recommend you look at the whole museum, look at everything in the museum. And I don't mean closely as much as you look at it, and look for that special something. But yeah, the literature, all the rest, yeah, you can. I think you can picture it. What Gammell would have been saying. I'm just going to glance at the pictures and see if there's anything else that I could recommend based on these. No, that's really it. I think that's really it. Think of painting as a discipline, and all of a sudden you're into all kinds of different people's conversations. All right, so that will do it for today, and I do thank you guys again for your really excellent contributions to our efforts here. And again, Mr. Producer, one of these days, hopefully before he gets married, I think he's aiming himself at October right now. Hey, Mr. Producer, if you don't mind saying that, you'll have to cut it off. Um, but thank you all for sharing, liking. All of those things do help a bit with the advertising portion of this thing. I haven't talked to Mr. Producer, so I assume it's all just covering his expenses. He hasn't, the expense of doing the editing and all that sort of thing. And he is a good professional that makes a living at this, so it's really good the way he's been. It's really been wonderful how good he's been to me, to us all. Thank you again, Mr. Producer. All right, take care. See you in the next one.